Hi everyone, welcome back to another video and a video all about photo settings.
So we have done quite a bit of street photography in the past. It's kind of the way we got into really starting to try and improve our photography. And most of the time that involves a lot of pretty much the lowest aperture you can have and the highest shutter because you're capturing a lot of action. And you want the focus to mainly be on your subject, which in street photography is normally a person. And they're normally moving, so the shutter speed needs to be quite high so you don't end up with a lot of motion blur. But most of last year and pretty much all of this year so far, we've been doing more nature and landscape style photography, which is a totally different ball game. Settings are all different and we're still learning it. As anybody is, we're always learning when it comes to photography.
A lot of the times we do often get asked, what settings did you use for that pic, or what's the best settings to use for my pictures? So we thought we would run through in this video just a few of our favourite pictures that we've taken in the past while, the settings that we used for them, kind of the idea behind them, and what was going through our head whenever we were taking them.
It's always interesting from our point of view to see what other photographers use, so we're going to let you know the reason why we used what we used in these photos.
So the photos that we're using for this video were all taken on the Fuji XT30, and we do of course shoot in RAW. I thought I'd just throw that out there.
Well, we do. And it was shot on the 18 to 55mm lens, by the way.
Okay, so let's start with this first one. It was shot on a forest trail and it just happened to snow a few days ago and there was snow on the mountains, so we wanted to really capture those snowy mountains in the background.
So with this shot, I wanted to make sure that pretty much everything in the frame was in focus, and I believe with this lens, like f5.6 is probably the sharpest aperture from what I've seen and also from the little bit of research that I've done on it. So I went with 5.6 and I wanted to keep the shutter as high as I could because I was hand holding it. And
hand holding it?
Hand holding it is
that
not.
just sounded funny.
It was handheld. It wasn't the brightest day, and when I'm taking shots like this, I don't really want the shutter to be much lower than 1/100th. I know a lot of cameras can shoot, and I probably could have shot it lower, but I just don't want to be hand holding shots and being too low because there is shake and the camera itself doesn't have stabilization. So yeah, kept it at 100. That's why the ISO was a little bit higher because it was quite dull. And I actually focused on the mountain in distance and just let everything else kind of fall into focus with f5.6. And it turned out pretty well. Probably is my favorite shot since we started doing these more nature landscape type photos because I just like it. The path kind of leads away around to the side. We've got the mountain, we've got the trees, and the mountain has snow on it, which just is a nice little touch.
It would not have been the same if that mountain did not have snow on it. It makes the photo.
It does add a nice little extra aspect to it. So the settings we're choosing for these photos are probably far from perfect, but at the time that's what we feel like is going to get the shot that we think we want. So yeah, that's all.
So the next photo is a portrait of me, which I obviously didn't take myself. This is one that you took.
Yeah, we were in the forest, it had snowed a lot and we were just kind of wandering around, and I wanted to take a few portraits of Christina just because it looks cool and we don't get the snow that often. Yeah. So with this one, I believe I zoomed in almost the whole way for this lens.
Yeah,
55mm. That was just to get the nice bit of depth in the background, and if it had been any wider, there just would have been too much. The framing is just nicer when I zoomed in. But that did mean that it ended up going up to f.4 on the lens, which it automatically does. So to compensate for that, I had to put the ISO up quite a bit. I put it up to, what was it?
1250.
1250. I actually had to go as low as, what was the shutter? 160?
80.
1/80th, which is kind of on the limit that I would want to do for a portrait with this camera. But it turned out okay, and I like how it looked. There's enough space to kind of see the snow in the background. Still ended up being sharp, so I'm pretty happy with how that one turned out. So this next photo was took at the north coast, and we were just walking along the little path which takes you to the rope bridge, and I seen this little boat just chugging along in the water. And the path where I was standing, the idea was that I was waiting for the boat to get in line with the little path, so I kind of had like a leading line, so the path led down right to where the boat would be. And I took a few shots and one of them lined up pretty nicely, which I was quite happy with. I actually put the focus point right on the little edge part, as close to the edge where the boat would be as I could, so that when the boat came along it was going to focus on the boat, or the boat would be in focus. So because I was quite far away and I didn't want the boat to look really small, again I zoomed in the whole way, which brings the aperture up to f.4. I was trying to keep the shutter speed as high as I could so it would be sharp, and I'm not sure what the deal was with the ISO. I may have just forgot to put it back to 100. So really the only thing that I could play around with on this one was the shutter speed and kind of the ISO, but I wanted to make sure that because the boat was moving that I would capture it and it would be sharp, there'd be no motion blur, and that's really it. The rest were kind of set in already because I zoomed in the full way. The aperture couldn't be any lower, and I didn't really feel like I wanted to put it any higher because I wanted to make sure my shutter speed was high enough to capture the motion of the boat and kind of freeze the shot.
So the next shot is of Chris here standing at the edge of this cliff in Antrim, which is obviously a shot that I took. Actually, this isn't the edge of a cliff, but it looks like the edge of a cliff because of the magic of framing.
It does.
Now, when I'm taking photos, I always have it in my head that I'm taking photos for Instagram, and therefore I automatically tend to go to a portrait stance. Would it be a stance?
Stance,
a
yeah.
Portrait stance.
That is actually, now that you bring that up, it's something that when doing these nature and landscape photos, we've really had to
adjust our thinking.
Yeah,
on that.
and make sure that we always take both, because if we're ever thinking of maybe framing a photo or something like that, we always have the landscape.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're not used to that, but we're getting there.
So this was actually one of those times where I started taking this photo and I automatically went to portrait, and it wasn't, I mean, it was good, but once I went to landscape, I was like, yes, this is what the photo needs. The landscape just looks so much better.
There's too much of a scene.
I know. So I was obviously zoomed the full way in here at 55mm, which automatically put my aperture to f4. So for this shot, I was, of course, down to the ground. So I was actually like hovering, like on my, what was it called when you're hovering down low?
Like crouching.
I was crouching, that's the word. I was crouching down low, so I was a little bit worried about motion blur in case, you know, because you're not always that steady when you're down low to the ground. So I wanted to make sure that if I moved a little, or even if Chris moved a little, that it would still be nice and sharp and there would be no motion blur. Did you hear that? Blur, blur. So using the rule of thirds for this one, I kind of framed Chris off to the side of the picture. I wanted to make sure that he wasn't covering any of the islands that you could see in the distance. There was like little bits of island or rock in the water, so I wanted to make sure that he wasn't covering those. And it just so happened that there was like a little sliver where the big island was on one side and there was a little tiny rock on the other side. Like if that hadn't been there, I don't think it would have been as perfect, but he just happened to fit right in between those two little pieces in the frame, and it just made it look so good.
And there was a tiny little boat in the distance too, which just adds to it again. But yeah, I like it. It's definitely one of my favorite shots from that trip, so nice one. Okay, so this last shot, I was actually debating including it, and was debating it right there whether or not I should pick another one, but I think this is a good example of a photo where there isn't really a subject, and I found it at the time a little bit tricky to kind of get a shot of this, but while looking at it, it looked cool. We had like the lake, the trees, the snowy mountain, the snow kind of everywhere, and I was trying to figure out how to get a nice shot, a nice frame, how to frame this scene. And the way I did it was I kind of left the trees on the left hand side, kind of like the left third, just kind of coming in towards the middle of the frame, because I felt like if I had showed the trees any less, there would have just been a lot of kind of empty space with just the water, and there's not much going on in the mountain in the background. And if I had brought the trees in any more, they would have just kind of took over the frame. So I focused on the trees, kept them on kind of the left third of the frame. So I shot this one at 35mm, and that was just to get the framing that I wanted. I was quite far away from those trees. 35mm just framed them so they were kind of on the left third. F8, I was able to go up because it was really bright. It was midday, there was snow, and I wanted to kind of make sure everything was in focus from the little bit in the foreground to the trees and then the mountain in the distance, so I went F8. I'm not sure exactly why I chose 320 of a shutter, and I'm not sure why the ISO was at 400. I could have dropped the shutter down a bit and dropped the ISO, but that's what I went for. It was mainly about the framing with the focal length and the aperture to get everything in focus. Yeah, the other two are just kind of a bit random, but it worked out how I wanted it to. Everything ended up being sharp, and yeah, I kind of like it, as tricky as it was to kind of get a shot from that spot.
Were you low to the ground getting this shot? Were you
No.
worried about motion blur?
No, I actually wasn't. I tried a few different shots, and I think I just took this at eye level because I wasn't really trying to get that much in the foreground. So, yeah. So, like we said at the start with the nature and landscape photography, we're still learning. We try different things and try different settings and see what works out, and next time we go out we try to use those, and yeah, all the learning process, like photography, just always is. You're always learning. Every time you go out and take photos, you learn something new.
So we might actually do more of these videos if you find it helpful. The photos that we mentioned did come from our photo vlog, so feel free to check them out if you want to have a look at the videos. And if there's any photos within our videos that you're curious about, maybe you wondered how we took it or what settings we did, then feel free to, I don't know, ask us.
Drop a comment. So yeah, hopefully you found this one helpful. If you did, maybe sure to give the video a thumbs up. It really helps us out because we're a new channel. And maybe consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this and our cinematic kind of photo vlogs that we do as well.
Is that it?
I believe so. As we always say, take it easy.
Don't be a stranger.